Good evening, everyone. My name is Christina Nguyen. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the ACLU of Oregon's Membership Engagement Officer and your host tonight. Thank you for joining us tonight, especially after a long and exhausting week. Thank you especially for standing with us through 2020 and really the last 4 long and difficult years. Tonight, I'm excited to be with my ACLU of Oregon colleagues and to be gathered with our supporters and allies across the state to celebrate what we've accomplished together in 2020 and to look forward at the work ahead of us. In our time together, you'll hear from almost all of your ACLU of Oregon's team and also from a couple of our amazing partners. And we will share our reflections from this year and our vision moving forward. The event is recorded and will be available on our website tomorrow, so please feel free to share the celebration with your friends and family. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our captioner, Carol Studeman from LNS Captioning, and our ASL interpreter, Summer Nunn. If you prefer to have the interpreter's window large and the rest of the participants' window much smaller, you can use the pin feature to keep one window larger than the rest. We will have a short Q&A session towards the end tonight, so please send in your questions by using the Q&A box and not the chat box. If anybody wants ASL interpretation to ask a question, let us know by sending us a message in the chat box. Before we dive in, I'd like to ground us tonight in group agreements. By participating today, it is our expectation that you will create a space which values and respects differences of age, ethnicity, race, immigration status, age, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, ability, and socioeconomic circumstance. We will each respect and contribute to the ACLU's culture of belonging by fostering an equitable and inclusive experience in all aspects of community work by centering BIPOC voices and experiences. This will look like listening to understand, making space for and prioritizing oppressed voices, speaking my truth responsibly, taking responsibility for your impact regardless of your intent, and for white people and other privileged identities to not put the burden on BIPOC and other oppressed groups to educate you about the harm that your actions and behavior created. Being willing to do things differently and experience discomfort, and seeing discomfort and tension as an opportunity to grow and not a barrier to it. Thank you for your willingness to be here with us and honoring this space. And to kick us off, I'd like to welcome our Interim Executive Director, Jan Carson. Jan?
Thank you, Christina. Good evening. What a year this has been. We cannot say it enough. Every vote counts, and every vote must be counted. Donald Trump will be gone from office, and that is no small feat. I want you to know you can count on the ACLU to do what it takes to ensure a peaceful constitutional transition of power. As Christina said, the past 4 years have been characterized by division, injustice, and relentless assaults on all of our rights. And we remain a very divided country. The work ahead is as essential as it is difficult. The damage done to our democracy must be repaired. Voter suppression in all its forms must be undone. The veneer of polite racism has been stripped away. There can be no denying this duality that exists in our country and within us, that the democratic institutions so many of us believe in also contribute to the oppression of so many BIPOC people living in America, living in Oregon. This oppression has been exposed again for a new generation to challenge and change. This is work we all must do every day, everywhere, for everyone. 2020 has been tough. These past 4 years have been tough. 4 years ago, you joined the ACLU to resist, and together we have. We filed more than 400 lawsuits against the Trump administration's policies. We have been relentless in our defense of basic human rights from assaults by this administration and others. 4 years ago, we also suggested that there was an opportunity to make significant progress on civil rights here in Oregon and together we delivered. We worked with some of the people most impacted in our criminal justice system, and together we brought about significant changes in Oregon policies. We shined a spotlight on the tremendous power of district attorneys and showed that accountability for these elected officials was necessary and possible. With a broad coalition, we successfully reformed sentencing laws to create a more humane youth justice system that focuses on accountability for youth and safety for our communities. We reduced criminal penalties for drug possession through the legislature, and this month, Oregonians approved Measure 110 to treat addiction as a public health issue. Our work to better protect the thousands of people from COVID who are in our prisons and jails wasn't as successful as we wanted. And that doesn't mean that we will stop. It means we must continue. The ACLU works on so many issues because all of these rights are fundamental to being human, to living with dignity, to thriving. Our rights are indivisible, and our work to protect and advance our rights is multifaceted. And most importantly, we are shifting how we do our social justice work. True social justice will only come by centering the lived experiences of BIPOC and other oppressed people. This is how a more perfect union will be built, by all of us, for all of us. We have to remember, we have never relied on the White House to fix what's wrong in our country. The Supreme Court doesn't lead change, nor does Congress. Real change has always come from the bottom up. Together, we are the change. Thank you for supporting our work. Thank you for being here tonight. And now I'm excited for you to hear from some of my colleagues. I want you to know that this organization has a great team of people dedicated to this work. And they are tired, like the rest of us, have had to navigate hardship and loss due to COVID, like the rest of us. And they have shown up every day to do the important work of the ACLU. So please join me in sending love and appreciation their way. Back to you, Christina.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you for your 34 years of leadership. Like Jan said and alluded to, we can't talk about 2020 without acknowledging COVID-19 and how it's impacted the ways in which we live, work, and play, and notably how it's taken a toll on the most vulnerable communities. I'd like to invite our paralegal, Crystal Boswell, to talk about the ACLU of Oregon's response to the pandemic. Hi, Crystal.
Hi, Christina, thanks. Of the many challenges facing us in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic has been especially difficult. On March 8th, Governor Kate Brown declared a state of emergency due to the public health threat posed by the novel infectious coronavirus. And since then, the coronavirus has changed the way we work and the way we live. But for the approximately 14,000 incarcerated individuals in Oregon's prisons, COVID-19 poses the threat of turning a prison sentence into a death sentence. As of today, more than 1,300 incarcerated individuals and over 300 staff members in Oregon's prisons have tested positive for COVID-19, and 16 adults in custody have died. The Constitution requires our government officials to ensure people living in prisons have a safe living environment and basic health care. But our state prisons are overcrowded, making social distancing impossible. We must reduce our state prison population to ensure the constitutional rights of incarcerated people are protected. On March 19th, in collaboration with the Oregon Justice Resource Center, Disability Rights Oregon, and several other community-based organizations, we sent a letter to Governor Brown urging her to create a task force composed of coalition members, health experts, and public officials to assess policies and practices in response to the pandemic, and to expedite the safe release of people incarcerated in Oregon's jails and prisons. We also sent letters to the Oregon District Attorneys Association, the Oregon State Sheriff's Association, the Oregon Department of Corrections, Chief Justice Martha Walters of the Oregon Supreme Court, and we provided testimony to the Special Joint Legislative Committee on Coronavirus Response. Through our intake system, we have responded to over 500 requests for assistance related to COVID-19. Our team of intake volunteers has also sent out over 300 packets to incarcerated individuals containing information on how to file a petition for habeas corpus, a legal procedure that allows them to seek relief for unconstitutional conditions of confinement. And we continue to send more of these packets out every day. In addition to urging Oregon's leaders to protect those most vulnerable to the coronavirus, we also filed a MIKI, or Friend of the Court briefs, on behalf of 14 incarcerated Oregonians. One of those briefs was filed on behalf of Danny Alcazar. Danny is currently being held at the Oregon State Correctional Institution on a parole violation. In addition to the COVID-19 health risks, Danny's current sentence was imposed incorrectly. Instead of running time concurrently for his parole violation, as the law requires when a person has only a single supervision violation, the judge erroneously stacked Danny's time on top of each other. With his current good time calculation, Danny would have already completed this time in prison if his sentence had been calculated correctly. In collaboration with the Criminal Justice Reform Clinic at Lewis and Clark Law School, we filed a brief supporting Danny's argument that he should not be kept in prison while he appeals the court's error. If you would like to read more about Danny or the Friend of the Court brief we submitted on his behalf, visit the press release section of our website. And if you would like to add your voice to the effort in reducing Oregon's prison population during the pandemic, please visit our COVID-19 response page. We're also going to drop a link in the chat where you can tell Governor Brown your concerns for the health of people who are incarcerated and working in Oregon's prisons, their families, and the surrounding communities who are at risk of being exposed. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Crystal. Next, I'd like to invite our immigrant rights attorney, Leland Baxter Neal, to recap our immigrant rights victories.
Thank you, Christina. Good evening, everybody. In 4 years, the Trump administration has unfortunately fulfilled its racist and hateful campaign promises targeting immigrants and communities of color. Without ever passing a law or bill through Congress, Trump and Stephen Miller have dismantled every humanitarian protection within our immigration system, making it even more cruel and dehumanizing than it already was. They brought legal immigration to a complete stop, decimated the asylum system, instituted the horrendous family separation policy at the southern border, slashed refugee resettlement to its lowest number since the program was created, all while terrorizing immigrant communities with abusive and secretive ICE tactics. But fortunately, that is not the whole story. In the face of this attack, immigrant communities and allies have never stopped fighting back, and ACLU of Oregon has been in that fight. In the past year, we've been a part of major victories to protect and advance the rights of immigrants here in Oregon. We continued our work to keep ICE out of Oregon's courthouses, securing a major victory when Oregon's Supreme Court issued a court rule in November of 2019 prohibiting ICE's warrantless immigration arrests in and around state courthouses. This was a major victory. Earlier this year, we filed a federal lawsuit on behalf of Isidro Tafoya Andrade, a US citizen who was targeted, detained, harassed, and racially profiled by ICE, plainclothes ICE agents outside a county courthouse in Washington County. And this spring, we successfully settled the case of a US citizen, an Oregonian named Maria Soto, who was denied a passport because the Trump administration didn't believe she was who she said she was, despite submitting all the necessary paperwork, including her original birth certificate. Under an administration that has cast doubt on the rights and even citizenship of US citizens born in this country to migrant parents, migrant worker parents like Maria, we helped Maria fight and obtain her passport. With the defeat of Donald Trump in this month's election, we are hopeful that many, if not all, of his policies will be reversed. But we can't just hope. Trump unleashed ICE, and until that agency is defunded or dismantled, we have to keep our state and local institutions walled off from ICE's campaign of detention and deportation. And that means improving our state and local sanctuary laws and engaging with our local officials to ensure that the policies in our jails, courthouses, district attorney's offices, state police, local police, and other institutions reflect Oregon's spirit of inclusion and equity. And it means that if we find out that they have been helping ICE agents to detain and deport members of our community, that we hold those officials accountable, whether it be at the ballot box, in the court, or in the streets. And it means continuing to resist and oppose any immigration policies that do not protect our communities and honor and the dignity and human rights of all people, regardless of where they come from or their immigration status. We must remain vigilant and outspoken, even under a Biden administration, and work to turn back the tide of dehumanization, detention, and deportation. Thank you for your continuing support of the ACLU and the movement for immigrant justice.
Thank you so much, Leland. For folks who are just tuning in, I just wanted to share again that we will have a Q&A portion later this evening, so don't be shy with your questions and send them in the Q&A box. That said, in the wake of countless Black lives lost at the hands of police, Oregonians came out across the state to protest and were met with violence and terror, including from the feds. The ACLU of Oregon is fighting back and will not let attempts to harm and silence Black protests and people go unchecked. To share more about this critical work, please welcome our Interim Legal Director, Kelly Simon.
Thanks, Christina. We have certainly been in a fight to save our democracy from government officials and law enforcement agencies who will go to any lengths to silence those declaring that Black Lives Matter. The federal and local governments escalating attacks on protests against racism and police brutality should concern all of us. We've already filed 5 lawsuits. Those are the number of our new lawsuits in this context against both federal and local police for their brutal attempts to quell the protests in Portland. We are absolutely determined to hold these officials and law enforcement agents accountable for these blatantly unconstitutional and unlawful acts. I want to give you a snapshot of what our fights looked like and what our successes have looked like in the courthouse. But before I do that, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that these successes truly would not be possible without the courage of both our clients and volunteers, like the ACLU of Oregon Legal Observers. You'll hear from one of our legal observers later tonight. So thank you, clients, and thank you, volunteers. I'm just so grateful for all of you every day. And later you'll hear from my colleagues about what's next, but I'll focus on what we've done this summer in particular. So first, we filed a case on behalf of journalists and legal observers, including our own Kat Mahoney and Doug Brown, who's behind the scenes helping make this event happen tonight. So thank you, Doug. To ensure that the public has access to the truth about what is really happening in Oregon streets. I think, there's a huge danger when police are able to control the narrative. So we thought it was important to get in there quickly and defend the right of access for press and legal observers. And we're already strengthening First Amendment protections of that right of access at protests beyond Oregon. The feds took us to the Ninth Circuit to try to overrule the victory that we won locally in the District of Oregon. And we were successful in both getting a definition of that right and putting the feds back in their place, frankly. Next, we filed a case on behalf of protest medics like Chris Wise, who are putting their lives literally on the line to ensure that Oregonians have access to care when the police are violently suppressing the call for Black lives to matter. And these clients are really inspirational to me. They really are embodying a new vision for public safety consistent with what we are hearing from the calls of those engaged in the protests. So that's our medic case. Next, we sued the Portland police for violating a law here in Oregon that we have that prohibits surveillance based on political opinions for their surveillance and collecting of information of the BLM protesters. And heads up, Washington County, we hear you might have a similar problem with your sheriff's office. So this is something we're particularly concerned about. It's a law we fought really hard for in the legislature, and we are committed to ensuring that that law is followed and enforced. We've also been able to forge some new partnerships that I'm really excited about with organizations like the Black Millennial Movement. They're a client of ours in a lawsuit on behalf of several protesters who experienced a lot of really violent behaviors. So I just want to warn everybody before I talk about these clients that they have experienced some really serious police violence. We've seen our clients snatched off the street, shot in the head, and subjected to a lot of other forms of violence from our federal officers who we now know were never even properly authorized to be in Oregon in the first place. No surprise there. Those clients include Mac Smith, and you may have heard of Mac if you've been following Portland protests. He's a true leader out in the streets for Portland. He was shot in the head by an impact munition, knocked him to the ground, temporarily blinded him. Andre Miller, Mo Healy, also clients that were shot directly in the head. It's really chilling to think about how many people we've seen shot in the head by law enforcement agents who we know are trained marksmen. It doesn't appear to be an accident, and that has been a really chilling thing to work with clients on. You also may have heard the story of Mark Pettibone. He's a part of this case as well. Mark Pettibone was the first person whose story came out in the public about being snatched off the street into an unmarked vehicle by unmarked federal agents. Another story that caught the headlines was that of Chris David, a Navy veteran who walked up to the line of federal agents to ask them about the oath that he thought that he shared with these agents, an oath to uphold the Constitution. And then instead of engaging Chris or even ignoring him, they decided the best option in response to that question would be to beat Chris with batons. So Chris isn't the only veteran client of ours either, and I encourage you to go to our website and check out all of our clients' individual stories. Our comms team has done a really great job capturing those stories and putting them up. So I encourage you to visit the case page and check out our clients' individual stories. And finally, I am really excited because we've been able to innovate this summer in thinking through how do we creatively push back against these abuses. So our most recently filed case, we joined environmental protection organizations to challenge the federal government's repeated and excessive use of tear gas and other munitions without educating the public about what environmental and human health impacts these weapons have. And I think the message there is environmental justice is racial justice too. You know, I think ACLU and others have been trapped into thinking racial justice is its own separate category, but all of these issues that we fight for truly are and should be seen as racial justice issues. So I'm excited about the innovation we've done in that case. And like I said earlier, these are just the new cases we filed. These are in addition to 8 others that we've already filed over the last few years against the Portland Police Bureau for their abuse of protesters, dating all the way back to 2016. And our work hasn't just been in the courts. We've been able to support development of really critical reports from partner organizations like Forensic Architecture and Physicians for Human Rights. And I think we have links available in that we might be able to throw in the chat. If not, if you Google them, you'll be able to find those pretty quickly. But these reports have really highlighted the severe threats that police violence poses to our humanity and our democracy. Threats that aren't dissimilar from those we're seeing across the world right now. Really quickly, we've also engaged in state legislative work groups, federal, congressional, international human rights work groups and advocacy to ensure that we're advancing proactive change and not just being responsive and defensive. So we truly are committed to change that shrinks the bloated power of policing that we've seen and invests in building and healing Black, Indigenous, Brown, and other communities that have been most harmed by the racism and violence inherent in our American policing systems. Violent policing must end, and we will be in the streets, in the legislature, in the courts, wherever we need to be until it does. So with that, thank you all again for your support. And I want to introduce a quick video of our protest medic clients just to give you a sense of their perspective, and it includes some video. And I will warn that some of the footage in this video contains police violence. So please do what you need to do to take care of yourself. So yeah, enjoy this video. It's from July of this year, and it is stories from our medic clients.
The police have tear gassed me. I got shot in the leg with a rubber bullet. That's still healing.
And were shoving me forward and dragging me across the concrete. Worked a 1.5 years EMS in my hometown.
I was an EMT. I'm a dispatcher as well, mental health worker.
I'm an OHSU grad student, and I have been attending the protests with other OHSU personnel to provide medical aid to the protesters.
I've been acting as a protest medic for the past 52 days.
I first attended on June 2nd, and during that protest, the police approached a fragment of the crowd that me and other OHSU personnel were in and shot us with rubber bullets, pepper balls, and tear gas.
I will every day put on crosses. I'll put one over my right breast because I wear a pack that would cover the other one. And then I'll have one on each of my shoulders. And then on the back of that jacket, it's actually marked with a big red cross, and it says the word medic in big red block letters.
So we had been pushed off the park property. And at that point, we were making our way up the street. We were alerted by protesters that there was a downed person. At the same time, the area was actively contaminated with what I imagine is CS gas. I don't know exactly what they were using that night. It was difficult to breathe, and this person was lying on the ground without any sort of protection. They're on the ground.
Yeah.
So what risk to these officers' lives or property could they possibly be? Our standard protocol is we keep an eye on officers. We don't walk with our backs towards them, or if we do, one of us turns around and keeps an eye on them.
If you turn your back, they like to check you pretty hard. And we apparently were not moving fast enough. What happened was they hit Kit in the
chest. So it was a stabbing motion with a baton into the chest.
Get up. Get up.
The idea that we have to go out there with armor now, or that we consciously have to consider armor. I guess that's probably like a big takeaway in our experience, is that like we've normalized violence. Like we definitely were not normal. It was not normal. It was certainly not normal before.
I think that the police targeted me and continue to target other protesters, specifically to make them stop.
When they shoot us, it feels more that it's a reminder that they could kill us. That like that rubber bullet to your chest, if they wanted to do it, that could be lethal.
So as long as people are going to show up, and as long as there is a possibility of people getting hurt, then I feel an ethical and moral responsibility to help try and keep people as safe as I can.
As people take to the streets to demand justice and shine a light on systemic racism, their calls are being met by violent and unconstitutional law enforcement attacks. ACLU of Oregon legal observers attend demonstrations to hold law enforcement accountable. To share her experience, please welcome one of our board members and legal observers, Elisa DeZono.
Thanks, Christina. Also, as VP Legal and Chair of our Lawyers Committee, I want to note that all those cases that you heard about from Kelly would not be possible without the support of our tremendous cadre of cooperating attorneys who have put in countless pro bono hours. So thank you to all of them as well. I've had the honor of serving on the board of the ACLU since the fight against Donald Trump began. I've always been more of a make change from the inside kind of person, so I'm not inclined personally to take to the streets But I do, however, firmly believe in the right of others to do so. So when the ACLU launched a legal observer program, I signed up. Our perceptions are all shaped by our life experiences. And as someone who worked closely with the Police Bureau and City Hall, I've appreciated the hard work that good officers do. And as a former journalist, I would like to trust news sources. But after George Floyd's murder, I decided I needed to see firsthand what was happening at the protest marches, especially as a board member with the responsibility for the Legal Observer Program. After weeks of largely peaceful protests, not looting and rioting as was frequently portrayed in the media, I ended up as the only legal observer at a protest near my home. It turned out to be the first of many marches to the Portland Police Association. And what I saw and experienced just shocked me. A wall of heavily armored and armed officers lay in wait for protesters to arrive. When a few water bottles were tossed towards them, they responded with tear gas. They charged the crowd, pushing and tackling people to the ground, striking them repeatedly with batons. Additional legal observers arrived on the scene just as the police declared the gathering a riot. And despite being clearly marked as a legal observer, officers refused to let me or any other neighbors go home, insisting we move with the crowd as they pushed us farther and farther east. I've since monitored dozens of other protests in North and Northeast Portland, as well as the Justice Center. And when police stand back, little confrontation occurs. So what I cannot understand is why officers who insist that not all cops are bad cannot similarly acknowledge that not all protesters are bad, that people exercising their right to assemble, to voice their opinions, and those who are there only to protect those rights, like legal observers and reporters, should not be gassed or beaten for doing so. We have repeatedly seen protesters arrested, even one of our own legal observers, merely for failing to disperse. And the danger is growing. Not only are police and counter-protesters armed, but some protesters have begun arming themselves for self-defense as well. Our legal observers have had to have discussions that should have no place in America, like about whether we need to wear bulletproof vests and helmets to safely ensure protester voices can be heard. I assume that all of us joined the ACLU because we believe in fighting for the rights of our fellow citizens who have less power. If so, I encourage you to go out and see for yourselves what is happening on the streets. If you are interested in starting a legal observer cohort in your own town or county, please reach out to us at the link in the Zoom chat. Support both mainstream media and citizen journalists who are out documenting both police and protest activity. If you have means, contribute not only to the ACLU, but our legal observer partners at the National Lawyers Guild who help fund bail for protesters exercising their freedom of speech and assembly. If you have a voice, use it to demand accountability from your elected officials. I left journalism because I realized truth is not black and white, but rather shades of gray. We are all shaped by our circumstances and our privilege. It is how we use that and look past that privilege to empathize and build respect that may pave the way to a more perfect union.
Thank you for sharing, Elisa, and thank you to you and all of the legal observers for your commitment to the movement. The work to support Black lives is impossible without the leadership and strength of Black activists all across the country and across our state. Tonight, I'm honored to welcome Kayla Wade, the founder and logistics director of So Equity, the Southern Oregon Coalition for Racial Equity, to share their insights. We welcome Kayla.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to the ACLU for inviting me here tonight. I'll dive right in. There is no racism in Southern Oregon. That is a statement or a version of it that I have heard too often in my community over the last year. What's troubling is that I haven't heard that just from individual community members, but from our government leaders, our business owners, and our police chiefs and county sheriffs. It was the statement that was used to justify the organized effort of right-wing militia to effectively shut down a family-friendly event designed to uplift voices of children of color in the Rogue Valley this past summer. And it demonstrates that we live in a community and a society that is so afraid of owning up to our own wrongdoings that we would rather pretend like they don't exist, or that we would rather pretend that the inequities and the imbalances of power that we are faced with every day have nothing to do with the racist policies and white supremacist values that our nation and the state of Oregon were founded on. Now, while the concept of systemic racism may not be news to many here tonight, the very existence of racism as it was manifested by right-wing counter-protesters during our nonviolent protests over this past year was a shock to the system for many people in our rural community in Southern Oregon. And it provided some important lessons for me. See, though I was born and raised here in the Rogue Valley, I spent much of my formative activist years in Portland, where I was able to connect with folks, and especially Black and Brown folks from all types of backgrounds, and who had developed a shared understanding of certain values in their activist work and with the greater Portland community. When I moved back to my hometown, I took much of that energy with me, but I failed to realize that here and in other parts of Oregon, we're still working to develop that foundation and sense of trust with our wider community. This year, I have come to understand that certain terms don't carry the same weight here as they do in more urban and liberal areas. Defunding the police doesn't have the same impact in a county that has consistently voted against tax levies to fund local police in the first place. So we have to start having conversations about prioritizing emergency responses to be handled by mental health professionals and community liaisons that are completely separate from the police. Black Lives Matter is unfortunately a harder concept to understand in towns with less than 1% Black population. So we are shifting our focus to visibility and strengthening our Black community and showing that Black issues exist even in the most rural areas of the whitest state in the country. Activists across Oregon are leading by example. We're showing up for our communities and doing the work that needs to be done. Here in Southern Oregon, Black-led organizations So Black and BASE are leading conversations with local police chiefs and calling them in on their beliefs that racism doesn't exist in our local departments. You can find links to those orgs and to So Equity in the chat. Radical mutual aid is strengthening as organizations with focuses on environmental justice, housing and tenants' rights, racial justice, and more come together to rebuild our communities that were devastated by recent wildfires. And within my organization, So Equity, we're learning from our community, both our supporters and our opposers. We're reshaping our vocabulary and modifying our resources so that we can better meet our greater community where they're at. True change starts on the ground with grassroots efforts, but it cannot be sustained without support at every level. We're proud of our partnership with the ACLU and will continue to build our coalition across Southern Oregon so that every resident in our community has their voice heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kayla, for your thoughtful reflection, powerful words, and also your energy in this important work in Southern Oregon. Next, we have Trinity Ari from the newly formed Siskiyou Street News.
Hi, one second. My camera seems to be frozen. Wow. There we go. Hi, my name is Trinity Ari. I'm with a group called Siskiyou Street News. I currently reside in Medford. First, thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak on behalf of what's going down in the more rural parts of Oregon. Siskiyou Street News is a group that formed in light of Jackson County providing no COVID-safe shelters for our unhoused community. Instead, they were told to shelter in place on the Bear Creek Greenway, a bike path where a large portion of the unhoused reside. We monitored the support that was claiming to be given, and started building relationships with the people camping down on the Greenway. The group transitioned into sweep response when police started sweeping camps in the height of the pandemic and against the state's COVID orders. Basically, the role we play is showing up to sweeps and other police interactions and videotaping what is occurring, alongside with offering our support to those affected, whether it be just helping them pack their things up or sitting down and talking after, or trying to find alternative solutions for those that are seeking that. We really just try to be there. We also do weekly outreach, and it really just looks like handing supplies out to folks and just hanging out with them. I feel like our group is unique because we have an approach that comes from a place of solidarity rather than charity. Many of us in Siskiyou Street News have personal experience with poverty, including myself. My mother lived on the Greenway for a period of time, and I witnessed from a young age the immense brutality and criminalization of the unhoused imposed by Medford police. In September, the Alameda fire displaced thousands of people and destroyed nearly 2,700 residential buildings in our valley. But our local government wanted to differentiate who deserved help and who did not. There were a few options for those who were priorly unhoused. To be clear, these people resided in the park that was fueled for this fire. Camps were destroyed and many were left exposed to hazardous air conditions for days after the fire stopped burning. Many lost what little they had and were still deemed less deserving of support than other fire victims. In fact, most were not even warned about the fires. Myself and others were running out in the midst of the fires down on the Greenway to help evacuate and warn people. Then left the question of where were they supposed to go. They had nowhere. They were evacuated off of the place in which they resided. That's when Hawthorne Mutual Aid was started, with help from parts of the community that actually supported us. And along with some direction and insight from some of our houseless friends, we provided a somewhat safe place for them to sleep and some other resources. That ended on September 22nd when the city of Medford and their police evicted nearly 100 people from the fire relief camp and arrested 12. Many of the arrestees were volunteers and members of our team, and also included an NPR journalist trying to document the raid. They're now facing charges of criminal trespassing. We believe the raid was also partially politically motivated, as rumors among right-wing folks in our area that Antifa and BLM had taken over the park where the camp was located. We were even asked if we were in Antifa by Medford police and experienced direct threats and harassment by right-wing extremists. Since then, the crackdown on our houseless neighbors has been real. The county is trying to expand an exclusion zone to include the entire 22-mile Greenway, which would allow them to ban people for 90-day periods. We've witnessed their increased harassment of folks for weeks, including sweeps when temperatures are freezing and while the pandemic is still in full swing. It's almost as if they don't want them to be able to exist at all down here. Going into winter, we're working to set up pop-up style warming tents overnight to provide a place to escape the cold for a bit and hopefully warm up with some hot food and drinks. We're going to call it Judy's, after Judy Berry, a ferocious organizer that believed in uniting activists and liberating the marginalized. Supporting us down here really looks like recognizing the unique challenges faced in rural Oregon, like limited legal resources, the presence and power of right-wing extremists, and significant political support for inhumane and hateful public policies. We are trying to do a lot with the capacity we have, and we're seeking broader support from the rest of the state for projects like ours that are grassroots and started in rural areas. Thanks again for this opportunity and for the work you guys are all doing.
Thank you, Trinity, for your fierce advocacy and for sharing and for joining us tonight. Next, I'm so excited to introduce our next speaker. She is also our newest ACLU of Oregon staff member and will be leading our effort to protect and advance civil rights and liberties at the State House in Salem and in every community in Oregon. Please welcome our Policy Director, Andrea Valderrama.
Thank you, Christina, and I'm so excited to be here and to be part of such an incredible team of dedicated advocates and social justice warriors. So thank you for having me part of your team. Before I share a little bit about what is up and coming for our policy and budget advocacy, I think it's really important to ground ourselves in where we've been, how it's impacted us, and acknowledge that we have been through a lot. And I'm not just talking about this year from hell, which thankfully is almost over. I'm talking about the decades of intentional, orchestrated, and resourced voter suppression, violence, economic and health disparities, and white supremacy that has, quite frankly, plagued our BIPOC communities. I'm talking about the babies who have died in cages at the borders, died on the shores of our country, or even while walking to the corner store wearing a hoodie. I'm talking about the Latinx, Brown, and API communities in Oregon who have contracted and died from the coronavirus at higher rates than anyone else in the state. I'm talking about the frontline workers during wildfires, during a pandemic, during record numbers of mail-in ballots who continue to risk their lives, providing us with food, essential services, and democratic elections. And let's not forget the thousands of organizers, Black leaders who have taken to the streets proclaiming Black Lives Matter, only to be met with violence from the police, militia intimidation, and tear gas. I know that you're tired. I am exhausted. We are all exhausted, but we continue to fight the fight that our ancestors fought. And despite the efforts of white supremacy and racism, we have prevailed on so many fronts and will continue to do so. For example, earlier this year, we supported the implementation of the Oregon Worker Relief Fund, a fund designed to provide economic relief for undocumented individuals. So far, this fund has provided over $30 million to undocumented individuals. We've also advocated for significant reforms at the Portland Police Bureau in coalition with Black-led organizations like Unite Oregon and Imagine Black. And because of our grassroots organizing, saw a $15 million divestment from the PPB, with an additional $1 million set aside for planning and visioning for resources for the Black community. Statewide, we also worked in coalition on legislation banning chokeholds, during protests, mandating reporting of excessive use of force, and disclosing disciplinary records. We saw another historic win with the passage of the country's strongest facial recognition technology ban at the City of Portland, again through our organizing and coalition efforts. These are extremely exciting victories that I would say even a year ago, I didn't think was possible. Our historic presidential election brought with it some local victories also worth celebrating. The passage of Measure 110, which decriminalizes drug possession and provides resources for addiction treatment services. And the passage of Measure 26214, or the Preschool for All initiative, providing universal preschool for thousands of children from low-income families. And I want to take a moment to thank you all. I know that each of you in some way played either a small or a large part in all of these efforts this year. Thank you for always showing up and showing out with the ACLU of Oregon. These victories are collective, and it's okay to give ourselves time to appreciate these milestones, especially when everything else is hectic around us. So I'm excited as your new policy director to talk about some of the things that we'll be moving forward and growing in both policy and budget priorities using an anti-racist lens over the next year. For campaign finance reform, after the recent passage of Measure 107, which amends the Oregon Constitution to allow for legislation on campaign contributions, the ACLU of Oregon remains committed to being at the table to craft and shape the statewide policy during the 2021 legislative session. We are also proud to have contributed to the passage of decriminalizing low-level drug possession charges, and our work is not done. We will be moving forward with BIPOC-led organizations to lead the historic implementation of this incredible policy. In coalition with organizations like NABRAL Pro-Choice Oregon, we are addressing the needs of incarcerated women in jails and prisons by advocating for gender responsiveness in both prisons and jails. Oregon is a sanctuary state, but there are many individuals who still feel unsafe. With partner organizations in the Oregon Ready Coalition, we are working to keep ICE out of our courthouses, county jails, and other state and local institutions to ensure all Oregon residents are safe. And looking to our work at the City of Portland, where we passed historic facial recognition technology policy, We're excited to move forward in drafting and passing a statewide policy on facial recognition and privacy, also during the 2021 legislative session. We want to cancel the rent, cancel the mortgage, and get additional stimulus dollars in the hands of hardworking Oregonians. We'll continue to advocate for additional resources for individuals and businesses impacted by the coronavirus pandemic and fight for economic prosperity for all, and especially for BIPOC communities. COVID-19 continues to wreak havoc in BIPOC communities in Oregon. We will advocate for adequate resources for testing, treatment, and vaccinations when they become available. And lastly, I'll just say there is no successful policy agenda without a successful people-powered agenda. This means we organize, we work in coalition, and we lead with racial justice. I'm so excited for the work ahead and for the potential to grow our organizing muscles and pass these and other policy items over the next year. If you have any questions or would like any more details on these or similar issues, please feel free to contact me at my email in the chat. And one last thing that I'll share is that I will be giving a 2021 state legislative agenda preview and briefing in early February. So please hold that time frame on your calendars. We'll loop back around as soon as possible with an exact date. And at that time, I'll give you more details on our state legislative agenda, as well as tips and tricks for how to navigate this new virtual reality that we're all living in a virtual legislative session. Thank you so much for engaging in our policy and advocacy efforts. Collectively, we can continue to realize the dreams of our ancestors. Gracias.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm so excited for your vision and to have you as a colleague and to learn with each other. I'm really looking forward to working with each other. That'll be exciting. And I hope everyone on this call will join us in our future upcoming events in 2021. We'll take a moment to answer a couple of questions from the audience. Again, if you have a question, you can throw it in the Q&A box and not the chat box. To start us off, we have a question from Blair, and I invite our speakers to come on back. This question is for Kayla or Trinity. Blair's wondering if you could explain more about what mutual aid means and how people can support your efforts.
Mutual aid means, providing resources is definitely the first thing, but it's not just that. You can't just go out with, some bottles of water and some things of food. You can, but mutual aid is, to me, building relationships with people and building community and really ingraining that into the people that you're helping support and the people that are coming in to help you support. It's it's really about building community and making sure that you're building a space, especially within the world that so many of us are trying to build currently, especially after the Trump administration and trying to move forward. A place of just respect and understanding and peer support and solidarity to support specifically our mutual aid down here in Medford. We have a Venmo linked to our Instagram on ACLU Street News. But honestly, the biggest thing for me in supporting mutual aid projects is being a part of the ones that you can be involved in locally.
Thanks, Trinity. Kayla, do you want to add?
Trinity really hit the nail on the head, but the only other thing that I would add is that it's also really about reliability. And in that building relationships, it's about ensuring people who have gone through a lot of trauma, especially this year, that they can feel secure and feel comfortable in reaching out to folks and asking for help. Trinity mentioned in her speech as well the concept of solidarity and not charity. And that is something that is the founding principle of mutual aid efforts in Southern Oregon, to make sure that we are meeting people where they're at, that we're treating our neighbors with dignity, and that we're not coming from a top down, oh, I have it so good and you have it so bad approach. It's about meeting actual needs and not making assumptions as well. So within our mutual aid network here in Southern Oregon, and especially around fire relief, we are constantly editing our supply needs because it's consistently changing based on the immediate needs of the folks that we're trying to support. And so you can find those on our Facebook page and on So Equity's website as well, if you're looking to provide donations or provide supply relief in that way.
Thank you, Kayla. And we've got 2 questions. This is probably for Kelly, Andrea, or Jan. Julia and Jill have similar questions about the rights of homeless people in Beaverton and Bend. Can you talk about our fight for the rights of houseless Oregonians?
I can hop in real quick here. In addition to the things that Trinity named that are important to Medford, I think, first of all, looking at what are those organizations in your community that are providing mutual aid, that are connected directly day to day with people who are forced to live in the street. In terms of the legal landscape, we've had a recent case here in the Ninth Circuit that has made it clear that governments cannot criminalize people for engaging in basic life sustaining activities when they have nowhere else to do those basic life sustaining activities. So we're seeing ordinances around the state that criminalize being homeless and not having a house. And that is a violation of our Constitution. And that's something we're committed to continue looking at. Where can we advocate for those rights across the state? Because it really is something we're seeing in communities across the state.
Thanks, Kelly. Andrea, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I think one other component to this that I'll add is just the layer of economic injustice that we see facing as one of the root causes of houselessness, in addition to the need to a more equitable access to wraparound services, whether they be health services or other essential needs. And those are some of the components of the budget advocacy that I'm looking to partner with our partner organizations on, to make sure that we're not just addressing getting folks out of the cold in the winter months, which is certainly a priority, but looking at the long term as well and making sure that they don't get back into that position in the first place.
Thanks, Andrea, and thank you all. That's unfortunately all the time we have tonight for questions. I'd like to invite our final speaker tonight to share how you can continue to support this work. Please welcome our Development Director, Yvonne Garcia.
Thank you, Christina. The work we accomplished in this difficult year was fueled by the support of our generous members and supporters. We hope through the stories we shared today, you are able to understand just how we put your donations to work and the impact of that support. There's so much more work to do, voices to lift up, and systems to deconstruct to move us to be a more just Oregon. We ask that you continue to support us in the work ahead by making a donation through the Willamette Week Gift Guide campaign. You will find the link in the chat. And today really is the perfect day to make a gift since it's a big gift day. Donors who are 21 years or above, giving $50 or more, will receive the gift of wine from A to Z Wineworks. And that comes in addition to the generous incentives from our Give Guide partners, 1111 Supply and Star Cycle Portland. For their donations, for donations over $25, they are making available through the entirety of this campaign. So be sure to check that out. Thank you for standing with us in this work to make sure we can do everything in our power to protect our democracy. We couldn't do any of this without you. So thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. I couldn't have said it better myself. And to close us out, I'd like to thank my amazing colleagues for joining us tonight and for all of your hard work. Special thanks to Elisa, Kayla, and Trinity for working in partnership with the ACLU and for your courageous work in your communities. Again, of course, thank you to the folks behind the scenes who made this event run smoothly, and especially to Summer and Carol for captioning this event. Before you log off, a survey about your experience will open automatically, so please take a few minutes to let us know how we did and how we can keep engaging you in our work. Thank you for tuning into this webinar. I hope you'll join us again at our upcoming events, including our virtual Liberty Dinner featuring keynote speaker Nicole Hannah-Jones, the creator of the 1619 Project. You don't want to miss that because the keynote portion of the event can only be viewed live and will not be recorded for replay. And while attendance to the virtual event is free, an RSVP is required to watch the keynote address. Registration and more information is available on our website. And I also want to again acknowledge that our victories that were celebrated tonight would not be possible without our volunteers, legal observers, board members, lawyers committee members, and community partners. So thank you all for fighting with us all year long. I hope to see you in 2021 by our side. From your ACLU of Oregon staff, we wish you and your loved ones a healthy, safe, and vibrant close to 2020.